Hey everyone, and welcome back to our channel. Today, we're diving deep into one of history's most pivotal and bloody events, the French Revolution. We all know the famous line, "Let them eat cake," but what really pushed an entire nation to the brink? What were the key ingredients that cooked up this revolutionary storm? Stick around as we unravel the complex causes of the French Revolution in a way that is easy to understand. Before we get to the guillotines and the drama, let's set the stage. Imagine it's the late 18th century in France. The country is ruled by an absolute monarchy, and society is rigidly divided into three groups, or estates. At the very top, we have the first estate, the clergy. They owned about 10% of the land and paid virtually no taxes. Then comes the second estate, the nobility. These were the wealthy landowners and aristocrats who also enjoyed immense privileges, including exemption from most taxes. Together, the first and second estates made up just 2% of the population. So, who was left to foot the bill? That would be the third estate. And this wasn't just a small group, it was everyone else. About 98% of the French population. This included everyone from peasants and urban workers to merchants and lawyers. The so-called bourgeoisie, despite making up the vast majority of the nation, they had little to no political power and shouldered almost the entire tax burden. Imagine working your whole life just to see your hard-earned money go to fund the lavish lifestyles of the elite, while you can barely afford bread. This massive social inequality was a ticking time bomb, creating widespread resentment and a deep sense of injustice. Now, let's add another layer to this growing unrest: money problems. Or, more accurately, a massive national debt crisis. France had been spending money like there was no tomorrow. King Louis XIV had built the extravagant Palace of Versailles, and his successors continued the lavish spending. On top of that, France had been involved in a series of expensive wars, most notably the American Revolutionary War. While helping the American colonists fight for their independence was a noble cause, it was incredibly costly and pushed the French treasury to the edge of bankruptcy. How did the government try to solve this? By taxing the third estate even more. Attempts to tax the privileged first and second estates were met with fierce resistance. The tax system was not only unfair, but also incredibly inefficient. This financial mess meant the government couldn't provide basic services, and the country was teetering on the brink of economic collapse. For the average person, this wasn't just an abstract number. It meant rising prices, especially for bread, which was the staple food for most of the population. When people are hungry, they get desperate, and desperation often leads to revolution. While the people were starving and the country was broke, a powerful new set of ideas was sweeping across Europe. The Enlightenment. Thinkers like Voltaire, Rousseau, and Montesquieu were questioning everything. They championed ideas like liberty, equality, reason, and the rights of the individual. They argued that governments should be based on the consent of the governed, not the divine right of kings. These ideas spread like wildfire through coffeehouses, salons, and pamphlets. The emerging middle class, the bourgeoisie, were particularly receptive to these new philosophies. They were educated, they were wealthy, but they were shut out of the political system. They read about the success of the American Revolution and saw a model for their own country. They started to believe that they deserved a voice in how their country was run. The Enlightenment provided the intellectual and philosophical fuel for the revolution, giving people the language and the justification to demand radical change. It transformed a sense of general unhappiness into a concrete political agenda. So you have social inequality, economic crisis, and powerful new ideas. What was the spark that finally lit the fuse? a combination of bad luck and bad leadership. In the late 1780s, France was hit by a series of bad harvests. This led to a severe grain shortage, causing the price of bread to skyrocket. For the average family that spent half their income on bread, this was a catastrophe. There were widespread food riots and social unrest. In the midst of this chaos, King Louis XVI proved to be an indecisive and ineffective ruler. He recognized the need for reform but lacked the political will and strength to push it through against the opposition of the privileged classes. His wife, Marie Antoinette, became a symbol of the monarchy's extravagance and indifference to the people's suffering, famously, though perhaps falsely, attributed with saying, "Let them eat cake." This combination of a weak king and a hated queen further eroded public trust in the monarchy. The government was paralyzed, unable to solve the crises facing the nation. To address the financial crisis, King Louis XVI finally agreed to convene the Estates General in 1789, an assembly representing the three estates. It was the first time it had been called in 175 years. The Third Estate hoped this would be their chance to push for reform. But there was a catch. The voting system. Traditionally, each estate got one vote, meaning the First and Second Estates could always outvote the Third Estate, 2-1. The Third Estate demanded a fairer system, where voting was by head, giving them a real voice. When the king and the other estates refused, the Third Estate took a radical step. On June 20, 1789, they declared themselves the National Assembly, vowing in the famous tennis court oath not to disband until they had written a new constitution for France. This was a direct challenge to the king's authority. It was the moment the political and social grievances boiled over into open rebellion. The revolution had officially begun. Just a few weeks later, on July 14th, the people of Paris would storm the Bastille, a medieval fortress used as a prison, in search of weapons. This symbolic act demonstrated that the people were no longer afraid and were willing to use force to achieve their goals. From there, the revolution would enter a new, even more radical and violent phase. The Reign of Terror, led by the Jacobin and figures like Maximilien Robespierre, was about to begin. Driven by a mix of revolutionary fervor and paranoia, the new government sought to eliminate any perceived enemies of the revolution. Revolutionary tribunals were set up, which stripped away the rights of the accused and expedited executions without fair trials. The fear of foreign invasion from neighboring monarchies, who were horrified by the events in France, only intensified this radicalism and fueled the crackdown on any internal dissent. This period saw a descent into chaos and brutal violence. Mass executions by guillotine became a daily spectacle in the public squares of Paris. The very leaders who had championed liberty and equality were now instigating a campaign of state-sponsored terror. The goal was to purify the revolution, but the result was a bloodbath that consumed thousands, including many innocent people. Eventually, public disillusionment with the constant violence and instability grew. The revolution was devouring its own children. The Reign of Terror finally came to an end in July 1794 with the downfall and execution of Robespierre himself, as his own colleagues, fearing they would be next, turned against him. So, to recap, the French Revolution wasn't caused by a single event. It was the result of a perfect storm, a deeply unfair social structure, a government on the verge of bankruptcy, the inspiring ideas of the Enlightenment, a weak monarch, and widespread hunger. It's a powerful lesson in how social, economic, and intellectual forces can combine to topple even the most entrenched systems of power. The revolution would ultimately lead to the rise of Napoleon Bonaparte and change the course of modern history forever. What do you think was the most important cause? Let me know in the comments below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And if you found this video helpful, please give it a thumbs up. And don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you won't miss our next deep dive into history. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.